The next driver of change I'd like to talk about is climate change, and it's one that I know planners are very much up on. I don't think I need to convince many people here, probably none, that climate change is happening. In fact, the rate of climate change is actually accelerating. And this is a slide that I use to illustrate climate change, not global warming. Global warming is actually probably a mistaken term. This shows a map of Antarctica, the South Pole, and the red areas are areas where temperatures are rising, the blue areas are where temperatures are falling, and you can see both are happening. They're rising around the coastlines and falling in the interior. That's climate change. And we are going to see that happening throughout the world. And the implications of it are significant and in some cases severe, and they raise significant planning issues as well. First, climate change is going to mean that we're going to need to build things differently. In coastal areas, it may mean we need to build dikes and prepare for flooding. For example, from storm surges, like happened in New York City. Meanwhile, there is and will be a rising need to deal with climate change by being more efficient in our use of resources. If we are going to start to develop neutrality, and people talk about carbon neutrality, but there are two others that are coming up right behind it. One is heat neutrality. I mean, you think of greenhouse gases, okay, that's one thing. Now think of a greenhouse with a heater in it, because virtually all human activity gives off heat. So think about now creating environments that are heat neutral, that don't give off excess heat. And water neutrality. Coke and Pepsi in India have been required. They were made scapegoats by an Indian government that was abusing the water supply. But what they were required to do by the Indian provincial governments was they had to become water neutral. In other words, every liter of water they took out of the community water source, they had to put back a liter. And if you think about what Coke and Pepsi sell, that's hard to do. They did it through offsets, but think about those two as possibilities for the future. The obvious area in planning is LEED buildings. I mean, that's not the only way, but it is certainly the highest profile way, and increasingly LEED ND. And if you look at the value of LEED, it's pretty compelling. A study done by the state of California about 5 years ago showed that a LEED building typically costs an average of about $4 more a square foot. Certified and silver LEED buildings repaid that over a 20-year period, and remember, the buildings are generally expected to have a 40-year time period, so 20 years is rather modest, would pay it back by almost $49 a square foot, and gold and platinum buildings would pay it back by over $67 a square foot. Clearly, from an investment point of view, LEED makes sense. And you know, that's the argument that I would be making. I wouldn't be saying, geez, we need to do this so that we can be good guys. You're not going to get very far with that. But if you say, if you invest $4 today, you're going to get $67 over the next 20 years, do you think that's a good investment? It's pretty obvious. And I think that's the kind of case that you need to make. And don't expect that people are going to understand that all at once, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about LEED. I mean, for instance, the image of building a green building in a green field seems seductive, but it doesn't actually make sense. It's actually an oxymoron. But people don't get that. Now, some developers are going to fight the idea of LEED because they see it as a cost in the building of the building that they're never going to recover because they're building it for somebody else or they're going to sell it off or whatever. And you're going to have to fight against that. But increasingly, developers are glomming onto this idea and using it as a marketing tool, and that's great, and it should be encouraged as long as it doesn't become greenwashing, because that just makes people cynical, makes them throw everything out. And there is going to be organized resistance to this whole idea. If you're interested, there's a book called Merchants of Doubt: How a Handful of Scientists Obscured the Truth on Issues from Tobacco Smoke to Global Warming, by Oreskes and Conway. I would encourage you to get and read the book. It's very depressing. And the fundamental approach that these scientists, quote unquote, use, they're basically scientists for hire, is that they don't try and say it's global warming isn't happening. They say, well, we're not sure if it's happening, and the data are ambiguous, and there are different interpretations. They're not trying to make it black and white. They're trying to make it 63 shades of gray. And that's what you're going to be fighting against, and it's like fighting smoke. So be prepared. I would encourage you to read the book just so you understand the tactics. And by the way, these tactics were developed by big tobacco to obscure the fact that smoking cigarettes gives you cancer. They fought that battle for 30 years successfully on the basis of doubt. Well, there are some studies that seem ambiguous. So that's what you're going to be fighting. The best way, in my opinion, of managing these issues is using what was described to me by U of T climatologists as the no-tears approach. The no-tears approach does not rely on being a good guy or being responsible or saving the planet or any of those warm and fuzzy things that don't mean a bean to the bean counters, but on the basis of you will save money if you go green. Do you think that Walmart has embarked on a massive green project for their products and their stores because they want to be good guys? They're doing it because it makes financial sense, because being more efficient saves money, which increases profits. It's an easy connect the dots exercise, but people actually have to see the dots connected. It's one of my favorite stories along those lines was in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, Xerox hired a new CEO, happened to be a woman, and one of the first things she did was she called the chief engineer into her office and said, I'd like you to look into what it would take for us to go zero garbage. We don't put anything out of the curb, nothing at all. And the chief engineer said, oh, that'd be wildly expensive. We couldn't possibly do that. And she said, I don't think you heard me. I'd like you to go away and find out what it would take and then come back and tell me. I don't want the conclusion before you've done the study. Well, all right. 3 months later, he came back very sheepishly and said not only could it be done, but it would be profitable to do so. And that's the way that Xerox went. So it just makes sense to do this, and that's the way you need to sell it.